we invited both Northwestern Energy and Montana Dakota Utilities to participate on this panel because we wanted to make sure that a conversation about Montana's utilities and a clean energy future included Montana's largest power companies, but they both declined to participate. For our discussion here today, we're joined again by John Farrell from the Institute of Local Self-Reliance and by Kevin Owens. Kevin Owens is the general manager at Beartooth Electric Co-op with their offices in Red Lodge, which is where I'm at. Kevin is an energy utility professional with 40 plus years of experience within the public and private electric utility sector. Mr. Owens' career encompasses many years of progressive growth and responsibility in the electric utility sector. He has held key management positions in utility management, engineering, operations, customer service, rate design, conservation, and power supply. And as you heard earlier, John Farrell is a co-director of the Institute for Local Self-Reliance and directs the Energy Democracy Initiative. John authored Energy Self-Reliant States, a state-by-state atlas of renewable energy potential highlighted in the New York Times. It showed that most states don't need to look outside their borders to meet their electricity needs. John has also written extensively on the economic advantages of democratizing the electrical system and community renewable energy. Welcome back, John, and welcome, Kevin. Kevin, we're going to start with you, but before we begin, I'm going to say that Kevin and I are both members of the Carbon County Resource Council, and we're an affiliate of Northern Plains. And a while ago, Kevin said to our meeting, why don't we partner financially with Beartooth Electric Cooperative and see if we can introduce energy efficiency and solarize a small public school in Roberts, Montana. So that project has begun. And one of the real reasons we want to do this is we're showing young students how to energize and introduce electric efficiency and to understand why it's so important. Kevin, if you were going to say that, you can say it again. Kevin, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Julie. It's a beautiful day in Red Lodge. I hope the sun's shining and you've got great fall weather wherever you're tuning in from here. Let me go ahead and see if I can share my screen here. And I think we've got it now. So I'll go ahead. Thanks to Northern Plains, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this this topic. Beartooth is a small electric co-op in South Central Montana. We serve about 4,600 members, and I think on the system we average about 3 meters per mile, just to give you an idea of the rural nature, I guess, of our service territory. We're actually only one of 2 electric co-ops in the state of Montana that have their own power supply contracts. We don't operate under a G&T, similar to Basin or Central Montana, or even those in the western part of the state that are served wholesale from the Bonneville Power Administration. So we're somewhat unique in that arena. It gives us a lot of flexibility in how we approach things. And I like that flexibility. It gives us a lot of latitude in projects that we take on. Just a a comment here, probably if you're not aware of this terminology, because I'm going to jump right into kind of a new buzz phrase that's been introduced to the co-op industry anyway. I'm not sure where it lies within the investor-owned utility arena, but there is terminology out there that we talk about beneficial electrification, which is certainly directly in line with what we're talking about today. This term, and I put the definition up there, also referred to as strategic electrification, is a term for replacing direct fossil fuel use through propane, heating oil, natural gas, gasoline, with electricity in a way that reduces our overall emissions and energy cost, as long as the end user and the environment benefit. So that tagline really focuses your efforts in that regard. Coming out of our last strategic planning session, there was a number of energy initiatives that came out of that strategic planning session, and I just highlight them there as part of the raise around our light bill, that areas that we're working on. And the one that comes to mind is the beneficial electrification. We embrace this, and it actually is a major focus point in our strategic plan to tackle this and start peeling the onion back and start looking more about what that means for our members and our communities we serve. Now, a year ago, we actually started headed down this path about a year ago when we partnered up with Helena Habitat for Humanity, our local Red Lodge Area Community Foundation, to look at affordable housing in the Red Lodge area. I think it's a problem in a lot of the communities across Montana, and this is one that popped up that we saw what Helena Habitat was doing along with Red Lodge Area Community Foundation, and saw an opportunity to get involved. That we had alignment on some pretty good issues there. So what they headed out to do here, those two entities, was build the traditional Habitat for Humanity homes, and had 3 of them built in a local subdivision here on the sweat equity model. The 4th one is going to be a spec home that'll be sold on the market this fall, and it's kind of taken on a name of its own as the Beartooth house. And I took a look at the building plans that they were building in these 3 houses and said, you know, there's an opportunity to do better. I think there's some technology out there that our members need to know about that's off the shelf, readily available in the marketplace, that we could take it to the next level and feature that in the Beartooth home. So in the process of that, Beartooth secured a $10,000 grant that the Community Foundation used as a matching grant to solarize, put 4.8 kW solar arrays on those first 3 equity houses to really make an impact with those. Now, the other part of it is Beartooth. I also submitted and received a $7,000 grant for beneficial electrification of that Beartooth home that helped us take it to that next level, that fit in where we were heading as far as one of our strategic initiatives. So when we look at those houses, the energy efficient design that's encompassed within these Habitat homes is certainly they've got Energy Star appliances, heat recovery, ventilation, heat pump water heater, and a super insulated building shell. That's the main package you're going to see there, along with LED lighting certainly throughout. Now, when I say super insulated building shell, they're really pushing the limit on this because of the slab. It's slab on grade. The perimeter insulation is 21.6. The R value for the walls is 37. They are a pre-made packaged panel that comes in from Bozeman. And the ceiling is an R value of 43. So they're really pushing the limit on putting together a good package. Where Beartooth entered into that is we'd like to feature this through model home tours and other communications to our members that, hey, if you're remodeling, upgrading your house, building a new house, take a look at the features we put in this home. So we've certainly upgraded the LED lighting and added some more controls to that. Where we brought in the beneficial electrification, probably primarily, is from a ducted mini split heat pump system, which has the traditional secondary heat strips in it. Now, most of you are familiar with a mini split heat pump because they're quite popular right now, is that most of those go into homes that are not ducted. In this particular instance, we have that mini split with one central coil going in the air handler in the house that will deliver heating, cooling to the different rooms throughout the house. So it's a way to trim costs. It's an easy way to use it. Those heads that go in the individual rooms in a house create a lot of extra expense. So we've placed it in a ducted furnace air handler situation. And we also added in the 4.8 kW solar array. These are the features that we would like to see involved in building within our service territory. So the best way to do it naturally is kicking the tires and getting out and taking a tour of what we have in the house to expound on its virtues. So this mini split that we put in here, there's two terminologies when you're out shopping for a heating system, especially a heat pump, is the SEER rating, which is more geared towards cooling, is a 21 SEER with a 12 HSPF, which is the efficiency number tagged to the heating side of the heat pump. This will provide a package system here that will provide the heating capacity to this home down to about -15. Now, in Montana climate, you know that -15 is something you can almost count on. -20, we're going to get at least 2 weeks of that a year. So, you know, packaged up in this particular house, it's got some resistance heat in it, but not much. The original design of those other three spec houses or sweat equity houses, I'm sorry, they have electric resistance heating in them. So that's not something that we want to feature in our house. We want to take it a level above that and put in a pretty state-of-the-art, high technology heating and cooling system. So as I mentioned earlier, beneficial electrification is one of our strategic initiatives that I'm devoting a lot of time and effort towards in our service territory, and working with the committees that work in hand with the trustees of Beartooth. We've come to know a few facts about our members. Only about 3.5% of our members have heat pumps. The market is primarily controlled by propane and natural gas throughout the service territory. And I think that's just based on the premise that heat pumps have a bad rap in Montana. Our weather is way too extreme for a heat pump, which traditionally didn't provide much heat below 35 degrees. But technology has really changed in that arena. So they are a viable option. And we know the installers out there are actually pushing these now, the hybrid piggyback heat pumps for existing homes when there is propane or natural gas available. They're installing these along with the new home construction. They're doing the same thing, is that a lot of these hybrid piggyback heat pumps are going in. Now, the Montana code that you're required to put in has a SEER rating of 14 and an HSPF of 8. You can upgrade that and push your contractor to install a SEER of 16 or an HSPF of 10. Now, remember that back to the Habitat house, we're putting in a 21 SEER and a 12 HSPF. So we've really exceeded that in what we're looking for, trying to encourage members to install in their homes. So our strategic direction, and this is just a small electric co-op in South Central Montana, is to embrace beneficial electrification and see if we can't do a better job with our members, helping them to reduce emissions as well as reduce their energy costs and leverage that technology with heat pumps that are out on the market right now. There's been huge changes in that technology. So what we look at is we're going to set a benchmark, the type of programs we're looking at that'll probably have a fairly good chance of rolling out this spring, is that once you go to a SEER of 18 plus and an HSPF over 10, there's a few features that heat pumps have designed into them. And one of them is a modulating compressor, and you're going to get a variable speed blower fan. That's the only way that they can get those higher SEER and HSPF numbers. Along with that, and I've been in the industry, like I say, 44 plus years now, and started my roots early on in conservation back in the early 80s, is that rebates by utilities have always been a very positive measure to help drive the marketplace to a higher level of efficiency or technology in this place. So we're looking very seriously at rebates to include to help bridge a member so they don't just get a SEER rating of 14 and we can push them to that 18 along with a higher HSPF level. And when we get to that level, we're going to make sure that they are able to leverage the state and federal tax credits that are out there available to them. So we're trying to change the marketplace and what homes look like. And strategic wise, this is kind of the future that we want to see out there for homes built in our service territory. So that kind of concludes my remarks. It's kind of fun to work on this stuff. Just getting involved with taking a look at the marketplace and how you might influence how our members might choose to build something in the future. So with that, Julie, I'll send it back to you.
Kevin, thanks. And now let's hear from John Farrell.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like half of what I want to do here is just ask a bunch of questions of Kevin, because I'm really intrigued. You know, in the keynote talk that I gave, one of the things I talked about was those tri-state cooperatives that have been looking for a way out of their long-term contracts. And Kevin kind of touched on that in his remarks as well, about how he really enjoys the flexibility that Beartooth has when it comes to picking their power supply, because they're not tied into a generation transmission or another wholesale power contract. And we've seen that as well in the work that I've done about with other cooperatives and kinds of the progress that they've been able to make around both clean energy and energy efficiency. You know, I mentioned, I think in my talk, the Kauai Island Utility Cooperative. They're sort of a recent cooperative. There was a for-profit company that left the business. And so they pooled resources together to do a cooperative buyout of that utility company. And I've had a great time talking with their CEO about the progress that they've made on renewable energy. Of course, being on island, they have to be really concerned about reliability and making sure that their power supply is sufficient to serve their customers 24/7 year round. They don't have any connections to other islands or other communities. But they also have been able to really make enormous strides. Now they're about 70% renewable. And I was just thinking about the connection between the beneficial electrification. You know, the motivation for the Kauai Island Cooperative is that most of their electricity production historically has been from imported oil, and which is very expensive. And they've had some of the highest electric rates in the entire country because of that. And so for them, moving to renewables even 10 years ago, when they were relatively more expensive compared to what they are now, was a really good deal. And similarly, I'd be interested to hear, you know, especially for cooperatives that serve a lot of rural customers on delivered fuel like propane, what we've heard is that heat pumps might cost a little bit more upfront, but that there can be some very significant savings in terms of the operations and maintenance for heat pumps, especially now that they work down at colder temperatures. And so I was thinking, oh gosh, I wish I lived in Montana. I could have Kevin send me some of his installers, because I am here in Minneapolis, where we also have some cold spells in the winter, not as cold as they used to be, but that's definitely been a technology barrier here as well. and we've been very excited to see how heat pumps can play a role in homes here. I think another example that just came to mind as well that I wanted to share about that really touches again on this idea about like flexibility and local control was Farmers Electric Cooperative. They're in southeastern Iowa, even smaller than Beartooth. I think they only have about 600 customers. And they are similarly set up in a way that they did not have a long-term power contract. And they actually had more solar per capita among their members than just about any place in the entire country outside of Hawaii for many years as a result of that, because of programs that they ran to encourage their customers to install solar, some interesting rate design stuff that they came up with to make sure that that solar was of benefit to everybody. They had some community solar projects. I think now more than 25% of their power supply is from solar electricity, really driven by being able to serve their members and having that flexibility to have those choices. Another thing that we've actually seen with co-ops that's really interesting, primarily in the Southeast so far, but we've seen conversations in other places, is a program called Pay As You Save or tariffed on-bill financing. I'd love to hear from Kevin about whether or not Beartooth has considered this. I know it can be challenging to set up the infrastructure for it, but the idea behind it is that knowing that energy efficiency and reducing energy demand can actually be of benefit to all the co-op members. Some good examples of co-ops in Minnesota, for example, where they pay a bill to the wholesale provider every month for the electricity that they buy. And sometimes that bill can be higher depending on the time of day that they need that energy, or if it happens during times of peak energy use, like on those hot summer or sunny afternoons. And so it's a benefit to the co-op to be able to reduce its demand. To tie this back into the financing, then some of these co-ops have basically said, okay, we recognize that the improvements you can make on your property, maybe it's insulation, maybe it would be a heat pump, maybe it's a water heater that we can control at the co-op level, and we can have you, heat your water at night instead of during the day when its electricity prices are higher. These co-ops are paying a lot of the upfront cost of those improvements and then allowing members to pay it back through their utility bill. And it's all relative to the savings potential. So things like insulation that have a really strong payback, the co-op will finance the entire amount. For other things like new windows where there's a more modest energy saving, the co-op will pay upfront capital for a portion of the cost of those new windows. So it's been a really interesting way to help members, especially in some of these, like I said, Southeastern co-ops where they serve populations that are lean much more poor than the members of other utility service territories, for example, in urban areas. And so being able to provide that upfront money has been really helpful. And these co-ops are actually able to get that money themselves from the USDA, which offers it at a very low or zero interest rate to the co-ops. So it's been kind of an interesting way that we've seen cooperatives be able to help their members. And I say cooperatives specifically because we've tried to see if we could get other utilities interested in it. ILSR has worked on this issue as well as a number of other advocates like Clean Energy Works. It really has been co-ops that have been the leaders on this because they really are taking that sort of like perspective of their members of, hey, we want to help you save money on your bills. And other utilities are, as I kind of addressed in my keynote, often have different incentives that makes it a little less interesting to invest heavily in supporting energy efficiency. So I'm trying to think if there's one more story that I wanted to share out of here, but I would really be interested in being able to talk to Kevin, ask a couple questions of him, have questions from the rest of you. I don't have a lot more to add from my earlier presentation. Be interested in the conversation.
Great. Well, we have time for some good discussion, and then I think I'll also bring up some questions that will be coming as well. I think Kevin was being very modest too in terms of the kinds of things that Beartooth is doing. Also being an innovator in Montana, at least for community solar as well, and there's a number of other programs they're doing focused on the beneficial. What was it? We get electrical beneficial use of electricity, or anyhow. So I think there's there's lots of other things we could talk to Kevin about or query him on in terms of what they're doing and how they're doing it. And actually, well, maybe since we do have a lot of co-ops in Montana that do have agreements with Basin Electric and others, Kevin, could you just talk a little bit about how Beartooth got out of that? Was that a struggle? How to probably was, but what do you know?
Okay, you're on mute, Kevin.
Yes, it was quite a struggle because there is a dark period, what I'll refer to it, that they went through and got very close to filing bankruptcy, that they got tangled up with a coal plant that grew into a gas turbine plant that eventually we had to buy our way out of back in 2010. So it wasn't without a struggle, and a lot of hard charging. It was a complete changeover of the trustees that got this co-op back in line where it should be. And, you know, we're sporting pretty strong financials and, you know, we selected a wholesale power provider that their contract ends up next October, and then we'll shift over to Energy Keepers, which is the tribal entity out of Kalispell and Polson area over there that'll take on to the next 5 years. So our power contract goes out to 2027, October. But what's unique to that probably responds a little bit to the questions John asked, is that it's an energy only contract. We don't have any demand. It's an energy following contract that we use it, they supply it. So there's no demand costs associated with that. But along with that takes the responsibility, as we started last year, to start doing our due diligence on how we're going to replace that contract in 2027. And that's all options are on the table there as far as build, buy, partnering, renewables, all that's on the discussion table right now that we're having.
Great.
And John,
Can I ask? I would just love to ask you, Kevin.
Ask your questions of Kevin, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I've worked with this co-op member advocacy group, We Own It, before, and they call Beartooth a beacon of transparency on their website. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit, because the experience of co-op members can be very different from one co-op to another, about kind of some of the changes that Beartooth went with around governance that have enabled members to have sort of more of a say in the decisions of the co-op. And I'm curious as well, you know, I saw Northern Plains report card on co-ops a number of years ago, and Beartooth scored very well on it. If you've seen other co-ops in Montana kind of follow in your footsteps in terms of the changes they've made to make it more accessible to member owners.
I think that all starts with the governance part of it, John, because that's one thing that came out of that near bankruptcy. With the change in trustees came a new culture to Beartooth. And after all of the information being hidden and not provided to members as far as how deep they were getting into this coal and gas, this gas project, everything was opened up. And that came with a new culture that the new trustees brought to it. And yeah, we do pride ourselves on transparency, and everything's on our website. And I can tell you, as from a general manager's perspective, that hasn't caused us any problems. Everything's out there for anybody to read or participate in. They operate 3 very active committees that have member involvement, with a trustee as the chair in the area of risk management, policy, and finance. So all those discussions are open to our membership, and we encourage their participation. But it's a culture. It's a culture that starts with the trustees, and you've got to hire a general manager that embraces that. I don't know how other way to respond to you.
Yeah. Well, John, if you got another question, then go ahead and shoot. Otherwise, I could ask a question too. But
Yeah, let me just ask the question about the financing. I was curious if I presume that you're already familiar with like some of the resources that USDA has available to co-ops. There have been these other co-ops doing these like pay as you save model. Is that something you've considered for Beartooth? And like, for example, like in supporting the beneficial electrification work that you're advancing?
I do keep track of what comes out of the Department of Agriculture. I've used their grants in the past when we undertook our community solar project. That was paid, 25% of that was paid for out of their REAP grants. But just the getting down to the member level, that is a conversation that we've had. And I think we'll eventually get there. I haven't heard much opposition to it. It's how it's structured and what the parameters are for it. But certainly, I don't think there's any opposition to providing on-bill financing. It's just that I can only handle so much on my plate. That's the limiting factor.
I hear you. Ed, if there's questions from the audience, be happy to hear those.
Sure, we have a question. Can you touch on geothermal heat exchange for homes?
Is that a question to me or just anybody?
Well, I think, why don't we start with you and then, but John can certainly chime in and
It's certainly probably the most efficient heat pump system you can put into your home. Or from that side, the limiting factor is price. You know, when you go geothermal, you're looking at a price tag of $20,000 to $25,000. And because there's been, in my history, or I guess what I've seen in the past, is making sure you get a qualified installer. They're not just the standard heat pump installation. You better have some technical experience and a lot of good installations behind you before you head down that road. But absolutely the most efficient you can put in, but it's driven by price.
Yeah, I could even jump in here on this as an architect who does very high performance buildings as well, and with similar levels of insulation as you're using the demonstration project in Red Lodge. We find that the investment in the insulation is a better return than at the scale of a house or a geothermal system. We have used geothermal systems on an educational facility where there's a place where there's both heating as well as cooling loads because you have a lot of bodies in them. That's where you start to a ground source heat pump, or also known as geothermal heat exchange, really starts to make some good sense. But at the scale of individual houses, we found that super insulation, and then as Kevin was talking about, the technology with an air-based heat pump has evolved so much in terms of it being able to work in very cold weather and still be, deliver heat. Is also another reason that we're just not doing that anymore. In fact, we just never have done a geothermal heat pump for anything other than a commercial building.
One of the benefits that we're going to have on the Habitat homes is I've got three installations to compare the Beartooth home to with their ducted mini split system. So I'll be able to get some good meter data as far as the overall efficiency and energy use, their bills, comparing the two of them. That'll be a nice outcome from that.
I'll just add that one of the things that we've been working on is that, cities are really struggling with how to reduce emissions from heating. So a city like Minneapolis in a cold weather climate, people have heating and cooling load, but the heating load is of course much bigger. And we, most customers in Minneapolis are going to have access to the gas network. Gas has been relatively inexpensive, at least until recently. But what we're seeing, so there's a group called HEAT, H-E-E-T, out of Massachusetts, and they've been looking at like district energy systems, in particular, how you could potentially get a gas company that has the right of way under the street and have them use that same right of way to install geothermal systems that might serve multiple properties, because that's what we found as well. that serving an individual home with geothermal, especially in a city, is very cost prohibitive. And that the air source heat pumps are still not cost competitive with like a gas furnace and a separate air conditioner. Another thing that we've actually looked at that's really intriguing is something called water main geothermal. So there's been a school out in New York that did a project this way where you put the heat exchanger on the water main and you're taking advantage of the heat energy that's in that system and pulling it out. So it's kind of like geothermal, you know, but you're doing it through a system where it has moving water. So you've got heat that you can draw from it as it passes through the system. And we've actually been doing some research and talking to some cities about a potential pilot project, potentially even like merging that with ground source geothermal and air source, that you could do a kind of a hybrid system. We're looking at what are all the heat sources that we have that are not fossil fueled that we could tap into. But those are obviously much better when you have some denser population, like in a city, than when you have, as you said, Kevin, 3 meters a mile is people pretty far apart for that.
John, I actually did a project, and it might have been actually back in the 80s, back when I was living in the Seattle area, that we installed an industrial heat pump that took its heat source from the large primary effluent pipe that the city of Seattle, King County, was running to one of their regional sewage plants there. And we captured heat out of the effluent because it stayed at a very stable 55 degrees or warmer, and used it for district heating in this industrial complex.
Wow, that's very cool. I'm enjoying geeking out with you guys on these sort of more technological solutions. We have had some questions that come up in the meantime. Can either of you speak to the role that local co-ops and their members can play in pushing larger generation and transmission co-ops to source their power through renewables?
You know, that just comes through each one of, whether it's Basin or Central Montana, they all have a board comprised of individual co-op trustees that are on that board. And that's the democratic process that exists to push the larger G&Ts to the route that I think John mentioned, Tri-State down in Colorado. That's what's taken place. Most of these changes, and I give this speech often, that you don't have to look to Washington, D.C. to orchestrate change. All the change I'm seeing is taking place in the local cities and counties through whatever mechanism they have there, and it's driven up to the state level. But we have a lot of control, especially within the structure of an electric co-op that belongs to a G&T, which is also just a larger co-op, that you orchestrate change. That's how you drive change, but it's on the local level. It's not going to come out of Washington, D.C. As fast as we want it to happen.
John?
Yeah, I mean, I think Kevin has one of the things I think that's been important lesson from Tri-State is sort of, as I was alluding to in my keynote talk about municipalization, is that these co-ops exercise some leverage, and they said, essentially, if you're not going to be willing to work with us, then we're going to leave. And that's complicated. I mean, they paid an exit fee in the tens of millions of dollars to leave because, of course, they're all members together. They invested collectively in these power plants that are no longer economical, and they're still on the hook for that. And so they have to figure a way out to do that exit, to have that divorce in a way that's fair to all the different members of the co-ops that have made those investments. And it's also just challenging too to recognize that, you know, unlike with an investor-owned utility that's made poor decisions where you could lay blame on the management, or you could say the shareholders own some responsibility, there's nobody else, right? Like the members of the owners, they all have ownership over these decisions that were made. So I mean, I think it takes a lot of organizing among those co-ops at the local level to get those boards interested in change, and then to make sure that those representatives that are sent to the generation and transmission co-op are heard. But it also, you have to be willing to sometimes say, like, does this relationship working? And is there a way out that actually would work for us? And, you know, what we found, I think it's fascinating, is that even with really big exit fees to those co-ops that left Tri-State, they're still able to provide electricity competitively. Like, it didn't have a huge impact on member bills in order to leave. And so what that suggests to me is the G&T can learn from that and say, you know what, maybe if we retire those power plants that are so expensive and invest in other things, we can actually do this for everybody instead of having people leave piecemeal. And I think that is important, especially in a cooperative structure. The idea is we're in it together. So the key is to come around and understand how we make that change. And I think I just add a couple more things on this that I think have made it complicated. One is that some of these cooperatives entities don't just own power plants together, they own things like coal mines. And so they have conflicting interests between, like, yes, we have the coal power plant here that's not economical, and we have a coal mine that's probably also going to be in trouble, but even in more trouble if we close the coal power plant. And then the other thing is just the nature of the relationship. So, Kevin was talking about a 5-year contract term. I think when we did the research on this, some members of Basin had contracts that went out to like 2075. So you're talking about really having locked people in for, 2 or 3 generations of co-op owners and members. And it's really unsustainable at a time when technological change is happening so quickly that allows for things to be done differently. So those kind of things have to be rethought. And I think really that local engagement is the most important piece.
John, Beartooth did write that big check to exit their G&T. And within a couple years after that, they lowered rates 25%, just to add a little reality, I guess, to what you were stating there.
All right, well, very good. Yeah, so we're seeing unfold before our very eyes. It looks like we are just about out of time. We're at time actually for this session. So I really want to thank Kevin Owens and John Farrell for joining us for this. We're going to take a short break and we're going to be back with a section we're calling the future of renewable energy, or I would say some of the future. There's a lot of things out there, and we're just going to have time for some of those things. For instance, we did have a couple of sections that we just couldn't fit in. One was on mining and environmental impacts of materials for the renewable power generation, and we need to educate ourselves better on that issue and figure out if that, to what that's being used as a reason not to be going to renewables right now. Is that anything real to that or not? So, and then also on hydrogen from renewable sources, is it what's its viability as a storage medium as well as a fuel and in transportation and whatnot? So those are things that probably we'll be doing in another energy summit. In the meantime, we're going to have the future of some renewable energy coming up at 2:05. And again, thanks to John and Kevin, and we'll see you back in a bit.
Thank you.